Alright, a few moments ago I talked about a Little Nemo page from 1906. Um, Now that I'm in the studio, I can show you what I'm working on today. I'll be working on this black and white strip. This is going to be another childhood comic for my nieces and nephews. And I'd like to paint a few pages in this sketchbook. But I figured while I'm here, I'm going to talk about something different, maybe something a little unusual, and that is perhaps the role of science fiction, or specifically the role of the science fiction novel. So let me show you something. This is my YouTube feed, and the types of videos to which I'm subscribed, they tend to be about art and comics. So when I'm drawing or painting, I'm listening to people talk about comics, or they're drawing, they're describing what they're drawing, or they're talking about the history, the industry, or things like that. So just looking at the first page, we see Dave Sim, who did Cerebus. He's talking about the late Harlan Ellison. This one person's talking about Teen Titans. There's some Comic Gate drama going on. I don't know all of the details. The art casters are talking about art. Okay, well, the exact specifics aren't really important. The point is, I listen to a lot of art-related content. When I was younger, when I was basically a teenager, and when I was in college, I used to read a lot of science fiction novels. So I'd read maybe two or three a week. And it's occurred to me that several of those authors have passed away in the last year. We had Jerry Pournelle, Ursula Le Guin, Harlan Ellison, and I actually remember when Isaac Asimov passed away, because when he passed away, I was at that perfect age to be reading Asimov. I had been reading Asimov for many years. So to take a break from all of this art-related news, I'm going to listen to an audiobook. So I wanted to listen to a Heinlein book that I've never read, and I picked Citizen of Galaxy. I've listened to the first 2 hours out of 10. It's very fun. It's a juvenile novel. It's a goes at a brisk pace. It's a lot of fun. I don't know when it was written. Probably the 1950s. So that's about. He started his juveniles in the late 40s. So let's say it's around that time period. And it's very refreshing to hear that narrative while I'm drawing or painting. However, I have been wondering, with the passing of these authors, what role does the science fiction novel, what role, if any, does it have today? Is there going to be a new Heinlein, or a new Asimov, a new Arthur C. Clarke, a new Pournelle, a new Harlan Ellison, a new Ursula Le Guin? And of course, anyone who studied the humanities is supposed to say that these things will never die and we will always have new authors. And I have no doubt that there are talented authors today whose writing is enjoyed by millions of readers, or at least by very many readers. It does seem that the role has shifted. What Asimov and Heinlein were doing, it does seem different than what a modern novelist is doing. And I'm not exactly sure why. I'm sure someone who really studies literature could articulate it better. I'm more of a visual person. In some ways, I do think in comics rather than in pure narrative. But over the last few days, I've been listening to old talks or lectures that Heinlein and Asimov did. And I listened to an interview by Harlan Ellison, and it seemed like their function was very different than what a novelist, a science fiction novelist today would do. In some ways, they were taking the ideas of Verne and Wells and the pulps and sort of processing them for a new generation. In some ways, Heinlein and Asimov are the improved pulp writers. They are the next generation of of Burroughs in a fashion. Where Burroughs' work is very magical, Asimov turns everyone into professorial robots in a way, in the way that he envisions the world, and he tries to bring these ideas out. Nowadays, a novelist, I think, is more concerned with writing the novel. And even though the ideas are there, in some ways these ideas have already been disseminated. What Heinlein and Asimov and Clarke were trying to express, they weren't really talking about galactic empires and robots and things like that. They were trying to express these ideas of the modern world, and it's not so much the specifics that are important, but kind of a way of thinking. And in some ways, that way of thinking has become genericized and has become a part of our culture in some fashion. I watched a lot of Star Trek in the 1980s and 90s, and the ideas from Star Trek were in some ways just repackaged ideas from 30 years ago, from the 1950s, and in many ways these 1950s novels and novellas were repackaging of the pulp writers and the comics of the 1930s. And now that those ideas are out there, what role does the science fiction novel have? And I'm not entirely sure. Um, uh, Perhaps I'm a little melancholy about it all, since I'm reading about the decline of the American comic strip in the 1950s, and perhaps something analogous has happened to novels. When I was a teenager, I read a lot of novels from the 20s and 30s, and a lot of novels from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but I very seldom read anything that was current. And nowadays, when I look for an audiobook, obviously I can only look for what's for free on YouTube. The books that appeal to me also tend to be from those time periods. I'm sure the science fiction written today is very good, if not excellent, but I feel more drawn to the ideas of the 50s and the 60s and 70s when I'm not sure to express it, but it seems like they really had something to express. Perhaps now the writing is not as sharp as it should be. The writing isn't can very sometimes it is very amateurish. And of course, these are very dated. Everything is product of its time. Uh, However, there is a there is a great appeal to the older science fiction, either the pulp or the novels, the novellas, that I just don't see today. And I'm not entirely sure why that is. Perhaps I didn't articulate this very well, but I'm sure as I listen to the next few hours of Citizen of the Galaxy by Heinlein, perhaps something will occur to me. I guess I'm just thinking aloud. Anyway, I need to start penciling in this strip, and I will keep you updated as to penciling and as to painting, and I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.